For today's story, we are talking about Dr. Mama Jones and potential issues of defamation that have been made against her. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this legal education content, and today may be the day I earn your subscription. For today's story, we are talking about Daniela Jones, a doctor who goes by the name of Mama Dr. Jones on YouTube, who specializes in OBGYN. She is licensed in the state of Texas, but for some reason, she is now the center of some sort of controversy in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is not Texas. Not quite sure how that happened, but here we are. So we're going to cover this, and we're going to try to discuss some of the issues that may be in play. Now, just by way of obvious disclaimer, I am not an Alaskan lawyer, so I don't know the specifics of Alaskan law. But that being the case, we can nevertheless speak to the relative issues in play in broad terms, and we can try to discuss some of the issues that may potentially be at play in a potential action from Mama Dr. Jones against the people who have potentially defamed her. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Right off the bat, this is Daniela Jones, MD. She is a board-certified OBGYN physician who is licensed in the great state of Texas. This is an article from the Alaskan Watchman, a newspaper of some variety, online or otherwise, that reports in Alaska. And they report the following headline: Fairbanks teachers want 12-year-olds exposed to explicit sex videos, by Joel Davidson. Now, right away, we notice that the woman in the background is Dr. Mama Jones herself, which is pretty weird. Why is she here? Why is she being associated with this headline? So it is creating an impression in the mind of the reader that these two things are linked. The photo is linked with the title, right? So that could be a false light tort. It could be an invasion of privacy. It could be false association. It could be defamation. These are the kind of things it could be defamation by implication. These are the kind of things we're thinking about when we see this kind of headline with this picture. We're creating in the mind an association that these two things are related that could be reasonably understood by the ordinary average reader. So what kind of associations are we creating? Well, either one, that she's a Fairbanks teacher, which, not so much, or she is the kind of person who wants 12-year-olds exposed to explicit sex ed videos. Or she's the kind of person who makes explicit videos that might be showed to 12-year-olds. These are some of the potential understandings a person might be able to reach when reading this headline juxtaposed with this image. So to the extent that those things are not true, it's creating a false light tort by putting her in a false light, false association with defamation. Again, this depends on the specifics of Alaskan law, but at least we're thinking in that direction. So going a little bit deeper into this article from AlaskaWatchman.com, we see the first and potentially troubling comments that the Fairbanks North Star School Board has heard a request from the school district to, quote, approve highly explicit sex education videos and graphic materials. She is a YouTuber. Her job, at least in part, is producing educational content relating to OBGYN materials. Her photo has been used in association with the banner headline. And so now, as people are reading these specific comments, it would again be potentially reasonable for a person to see these comments as referring to specifically her, or at least as emblematic of her, that she is the type of person who is producing the videos, or perhaps the only person who's producing these videos, this explicit material. Now, she says by her recollection that she doesn't produce any of these materials, which seems, more likely than not, for sure, if no other reason than YouTube itself wouldn't allow the promotion of that. Plus, I've seen at least some of her content. I haven't seen anything that even would suggest that to my mind. So this is, to my mind, looking like it's potentially suggesting things that might be true about her that are not true about her. Again, you're thinking about false association, false light, invasion of privacy, defamation, as some of your go-to torts that could be at play here. The article goes on to say, requested by teachers, the materials apparently tell students as young as age 12 how to have sex or stimulate their partner, which she says she's never said anything of the kind, which does seem to be true based on what limited amount of her videos I've seen. and also gives them advice on how to select appropriate contraceptives, including the morning after pill, which can cause early abortions. Now, she takes a bit of exception to this last part in particular in her video, because she says, as far as she's concerned as a medical doctor, and she obviously has the credentials, that she does not believe that the morning after pill can cause abortions within the meaning of that term as it's conventionally understood within the relevant community. But, obviously someone might have a different understanding, although that might not necessarily conform to medical understandings. But that's one thing she takes exception with, is that it doesn't conform to that medical practice. And she also says, more to the point and more to our issues, about the issue of her videos, that she's trying to apparently tell students as young as 12 how to do these things, which suggests corruption of children, which suggests undue influence of children. So now we're potentially even thinking about even more than we were before, but this is the first line that really, to my mind, really elevates the possibility. We're beginning to think about defamation per se. What is defamation per se, you might want to know? Well, defamation comes in two flavors, per quad and per se. Per quad is the kind that you have to show damages. You have to show that the statement hurt you in some way. But defamation per se, you don't have to show that. You don't have to show damages. The damages are assumed. The nature of the defamation is such that we can assume damages. Now, obviously, you can go on to prove damages, but you don't need to make that clear in your initial complaint. So what we have here is a statement that could be understood potentially by a reader to understand that the person who was imaged in the banner headline is the kind of person who is producing materials that tells people as young as 12 how to have sex or stimulate their partner. So we're thinking about that going to professional reputation. That's classic defamation per se. We're thinking about implying corruption of children. That's defamation per se, right? So we're starting to think about some possibilities, make it potentially easier for us to see this as at least a possibility in a court hearing. An additional quote from this newspaper or blog or whatever it is even more explicit in tying Jones to this potential content. The quote from the newspaper says, "Other videos by Jones, which are not part of the Fairbanks curriculum," because apparently some of her videos were being used as additional reference materials by some teachers. That's apparently how this came about. So other videos by Jones, which are not part of the Fairbanks curriculum, blast Texas's new pro-life law, banning abortions once a heartbeat is detected. Other videos celebrate transgenderism and Black Lives Matter movement. So this appears to be a bit of a mischaracterization of her videos, potentially. Now, whether it's mischaracterization enough to get to any legal liability in and of itself is slightly dubious, in my opinion. But more to the point, that this statement is making explicit perhaps what was only implicit before, because it says other videos by Jones. So not only was she a person who was in the banner headline as the banner image of this, and not only were we referring to videos throughout, but now we're saying other videos by Jones, which is defamation potentially by implication. Because all those other statements we read, although they didn't mention Jones explicitly, now in light of this statement, other videos by Jones, we start reading those other statements in a different light. Wait a second, when they were talking about videos before, were those also videos by Jones? Because these are other videos by Jones, right? So a reasonable person might be able to read this statement, other videos by Jones, and think that the videos talked about before that didn't explicitly mention Jones in its text, nevertheless were about Jones. If the association with the headline didn't make it clear enough, this additional text is creating a defamation by implication. As to the specific claims regarding his association she might have had with Black Lives Matter, this particular video that she has on screen, which she says is the only one that really touches on the issue, isn't really about the Black Lives Matter movement at all. She's using the headline as a bit of a clickbait, which is fine. She's talking about race issues in medicine. She's talking, according to her at least, based on my understanding of what she's saying, that she's talking about how race has traditionally been an issue when it comes to determining medical diagnoses, or it's been an issue in development of drugs, or it's been an issue in relation to the practice of medicine. So that there is potentially some gaps there that might need to be addressed in some way when it comes to these issues. So she isn't talking about BLM, although she goes on to clarify in this video that we're reviewing that she is friendly, or she does have the idea of BLM in mind, but this is not a fair characterization of the video, at least according to her. In this particular video that's on screen, OBGYN is science anti-transgender, She speaks about the issues regarding how it is important in her view for doctors to be favorable and treat people who are transgender appropriately, which I can't contest from certain medical perspectives for sure. People who are transgender obviously have medical conditions that must be factored into the analysis. I would imagine, particularly if you're an OBGYN, that might be an issue in some ways. So yeah, as it relates to that, it'd be something that you'd have to have on your radar. So what you might think about transgenderism in general is obviously of some note, professional concern to a doctor in the OBGYN area. They'd be able to correctly give the correct medical advice to the correct people. So while she again goes on in her video to express general support for transgender issues, at least it seems to me that's a fair summary of what she's saying, this video is a little bit more narrow if I'm understanding her correctly. Dr. Mama Jones also takes, again, exception to this line, which is more against her professional experience rather than her personally. So rather than more defamation, it seems that she takes this more just as professional umbrage because they're just factually wrong. She highlights this line: a separate video for high schoolers attempts to convince teens that Plan B, also known as the morning after pill, does not cause abortions. The speaker repeatedly emphasizes that the drug does not cause abortions. So again, this depends a little bit on your point of view about exactly what abortions are and what they're not. According to Dr. Mama Jones, she thinks that the medical term abortion only refers to procedures that end pregnancies. And according to her, which I'll take her word for it because I'm not a doctor, the morning after pill at best might prevent implantation, although even that is highly suspect. The morning after pill, according to her, typically and majoritatively only prevents ovulation. It does not prevent implantation, although there might be some suggestion that, according to her, it's very nebulous. And again, she's the professional. I'll take her word for it. She says that that can't qualify as abortion because you have to have pregnancy first, and it's not pregnancy until it's implanted in the lining of the uterus. Obviously, we could take exception or not with that potential medical definition, but she, being a professional educator, believes that this is at best misleading and at worst just plain wrong because it does not comport with the medical terminology that is being used. So she appears to want a little bit more precision in people's language if they're going to make arguments along these lines, which I suppose is fair enough. We should be more precise when we're talking about things to not confuse issues. This article then goes on to note its rationale as to why it thinks Plan B, or the morning after pill, is an abortifacient. So according to the article, it says, quote, according to the product label attached to Plan B, it can, in fact, serve as an abortifacient by preventing attachment of a fertilized egg to the uterus. Since a fertilized egg is, in fact, the earliest stage of human life, which it must be because it's a life by any scientific definition, and it would have to be human because what else is it? It's human by DNA. It might be a very undeveloped form of human life, but it's living in every possible sense medically, or at least scientifically, it's life. And it's human at that. So it is the earliest stage of human life. I don't think that much can be denied. But she goes on to say, or this article goes on to say rather, Plan B can kill this life by blocking access to the womb, which is necessary for nutrition and continued development. Again, this appears to be a highly suspect argument based on what Mama Dr. Jones is saying, and I tend to defer to her because I don't have the requisite information to contradict. So I'll just assume it's true that there is very little evidence, although there might be some, to show this, and she also takes exception to it because she does not feel that this is a fair definition of abortion, in which case it is not a fair definition of abortifacient because abortifacient means something that would cause an abortion. So if it doesn't cause abortion, it can't be an abortifacient, so she objects to it on medical grounds, which I think goes more to show how just generally the news media in general, it doesn't get any of the technical details right and often is garbage. And she objects to it on a professional level, which as a professional in law, I totally understand when articles get the law wrong all the time. Here's another article that is published by someone unknown. I don't know who published it exactly, but the title of this article says, School District Puts Racy Sex Ed Materials on Hold for Now. This article is by Amanda Bowman and goes on to say, OBGYN Danielle Jones, who is a licensed physician, explains 5 strange things that your vagina does that are normal in a YouTube video. In another YouTube video, the pros and cons of contraception methods for adolescents are discussed. So again, showing that those things appear to be true. Those things that are in the body of the article appear to be true. The problem is in the juxtaposition between the body of the article and the title, again, by false association, false light, and defamation, implied defamation, defamation by implication, because the title says school district pulls racy sex ed materials for now, and then goes on to talk about Daniela Jones's videos, right? So the title headline is suggesting that her videos are in fact the racy sex ed materials that are on hold. Again, it's by implication. False light, invasion of privacy, and defamation are all possibilities that are present here. So that brings us to the end of the discussion of this current issue, which seems to be brewing in Fairbanks, Alaska, and potentially coming to some courtroom, potentially near you, depending on the exact contours of Alaskan law. What we've learned here is that the Alaskan Watchmen have said some statements that seem to suggest some potential legal issues may be in play by this false association. Also, there's the misappropriation of likeness issues by using her image. So I'm not sure if I covered that before when I covered the actual image, but there's also a misappropriation of her likeness as well as potential issues. So what we've covered is like 5 or 6 potential causes of action that may or may not fly at the end of the day. Because she's a YouTuber with 1.1 million videos, it's likely that we would be thinking about the elevated standard for defamation, where you'd have to show that the people writing the articles were either knowingly false or showed reckless disregard to the truth. So obviously that can be very hard to develop. But of course, those are only the standards that apply in defamation. Some of these other torts don't necessarily require that. So while the defamation cause of action may or may not go anywhere, some of these other things like false light, false association, misappropriation of likeness, and invasion of privacy seem a little bit more tenable. Again, in order to determine this for sure, we'd have to know a lot more, and you'd have to consult an Alaskan lawyer, which I'm not. I'm a big Texas cowboy over here, but we can give at least a preview of the issues, and at least for a moment at least, that brings us to the end of the discussion of this story. Thank you so much for being part of the Uncivil Law family. If you enjoyed this legal education content, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. We appreciate your continuing support. And until later, my friends, cheers and goodbye.